Picture this. You're a sailor in the year 678. The sun is setting over the Mediterranean Sea, painting the water gold and red. Your ship rocks gently as you scan the horizon for enemy vessels. Suddenly, you see something that makes your blood run cold. Green flames are dancing across the water toward your ship. Not just floating on top, actually burning the water itself. The flames won't go out no matter how much seawater splashes on them. In fact, water makes them burn even brighter. This isn't some fantasy movie. This actually happened. For over 800 years, the Byzantine Empire had a weapon so terrifying, so impossible, that their enemies literally called it liquid fire and sea fire. Modern historians know it as Greek fire, and it was the ancient world's equivalent of a nuclear weapon. But here's the crazy part. We have absolutely no idea how they made it. The recipe was so secret that even when the Byzantine Empire fell, the secret died with them. Today we're going to dive deep into the mystery of Greek fire, explore the wild theories about how it worked, and discover why this ancient weapon was so game-changing that it literally saved European civilization. Let's go back to Constantinople in the year 673. The city is under siege, and things look pretty hopeless. The Arab fleet has completely surrounded the Byzantine capital, and everyone knows that if the city falls, it's game over for the entire Byzantine Empire. Now, imagine your Emperor Constantine IV, sitting in your palace, watching enemy ships fill the harbor like angry hornets. Your generals are telling you that surrender might be the only option. The Arabs have more ships, more men, and they've been winning battle after battle across the Mediterranean. But then, a guy named Kallinikos shows up at your door. He's this Syrian architect and chemist. Think of him as the ancient world's version of a mad scientist. And he tells you something that sounds completely insane. Your Majesty, I can make fire that burns on water. Now, if someone told you that today, you'd probably call security. But Constantine was desperate, so he decided to give this crazy idea a shot. And boy, was that the right call. The first time they used Greek fire in battle, it was like watching magic happen. The Byzantine ships approached the Arab fleet, and suddenly, streams of liquid fire shot out from bronze tubes mounted on their bows. The moment this mysterious substance hit the water, it erupted into flames that couldn't be put out. Picture the chaos. Arab sailors jumping overboard, only to find that the water around their ships was literally on fire. The flames stuck to everything they touched: wood, cloth, skin. Pouring water on Greek fire didn't put it out. It made the flames spread faster and burn hotter. The Arab fleet didn't just retreat, they fled in absolute terror. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. This wasn't just a one-time lucky break. Greek fire became the Byzantine Empire's secret weapon for the next 800 years. They used it to win battle after battle, keeping their empire alive when everyone thought it should have collapsed centuries earlier. The Byzantines were so paranoid about keeping the recipe secret that they created an entire system around it. Only a handful of people knew the complete formula, and they were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. The knowledge was passed down from father to son in specific families, like some kind of ancient trade guild. They even had special ships called siphonophores, basically floating flamethrowers. These ships had bronze tubes called siphons mounted on their fronts, and trained operators called siphonators, who knew exactly how to aim and fire the Greek fire. It was like having a medieval navy equipped with laser cannons while everyone else was still throwing rocks. The psychological impact was just as important as the physical damage. When enemy sailors saw those green flames coming toward them across the water, many of them would abandon ship before the fire even reached them. Greek fire didn't just burn ships, it burned courage and morale. And the Byzantines milked this fear for everything it was worth. They spread rumors that Greek fire was blessed by God himself, that it was divine punishment for their enemies. Some stories claimed that the flames were controlled by angels, and that only the righteous could wield such power. What do you think made Greek fire so terrifying to ancient sailors? Was it just the flames, or was there something deeper about fighting an enemy that seemed to control fire itself? Alright, so we know Greek fire was real and absolutely devastating. But what the heck was it actually made of? This is where things get really interesting, because we're basically playing detective with a 1,400-year-old mystery. First, let's talk about what we know for sure. Greek fire had some pretty specific properties that make it different from any normal fire. It burned on water, not just floated on top like oil, but actually used water to burn brighter. It stuck to whatever it touched like ancient napalm. It couldn't be put out with water, sand, or basically anything else available at the time. And it burned with this distinctive green color that terrified everyone who saw it. Now, modern chemists have been scratching their heads over this for decades. How do you make something that burns on water? It sounds impossible, but we actually have some pretty good theories. The most popular theory is that Greek fire was based on petroleum products. See, the Byzantine Empire controlled areas around the Black Sea and Middle East where crude oil naturally seeped out of the ground. Ancient people called this stuff naphtha or rock oil, and they knew it burned really well. But here's the thing. Regular petroleum doesn't burn on water the way Greek fire supposedly did. So the Byzantines must have done something special to it. Maybe they mixed it with other chemicals to change its properties. Think of it like ancient chemistry. They were basically creating their own custom fuel blend. One theory suggests they mixed petroleum with lime. You know, the stuff they used to make cement. When lime gets wet, it creates a violent chemical reaction that produces heat. So if you shot a mixture of petroleum and lime at an enemy ship, the lime would react with the seawater, create heat, and ignite the petroleum. Boom! Fire that literally starts when it hits water. Another possibility is that they used sulfur and saltpeter, basically the ingredients for gunpowder, but mixed differently. Some ancient texts mention that Greek fire had a really nasty smell, which fits with sulfur compounds. And saltpeter could help the fire burn even when there wasn't much oxygen around, like when it was partially underwater. But here's where it gets really wild. Some researchers think Greek fire might have contained calcium phosphide. This stuff is seriously reactive with water. When it gets wet, it doesn't just burn, it literally explodes into flames. It also produces this eerie green glow that matches historical descriptions of Greek fire. The delivery system was just as important as the fuel itself. The Byzantines used these bronze tubes called siphons, and they had to be precisely engineered. Too narrow, and the mixture wouldn't flow properly. Too wide, and you couldn't aim it accurately. The pressure had to be just right to shoot the fire far enough to reach enemy ships but not so hard that it exploded in your own face. Think about the engineering challenge here. You're trying to build a medieval flamethrower that works on a rocking ship, in salt spray, during combat. The bronze tubes had to be resistant to corrosion, the firing mechanism had to be reliable, and the whole system had to be simple enough that sailors could operate it under pressure. Some historians think they used a pump system, kind of like a giant syringe. Others believe they used bellows to create pressure, like a blacksmith's forge but adapted for shooting fire. There are even theories that they used steam pressure, heating water in a sealed container to create the force needed to shoot the Greek fire mixture. The really frustrating part is that we have tons of accounts describing Greek fire in action, but almost no technical details about how it was made or used. It's like having 100 movie reviews of a film, but the actual movie has been lost forever. Medieval Arab writers, who were on the receiving end of Greek fire, wrote detailed descriptions of its effects. They called it Greek fire or Roman fire, and described it as a liquid that burned green and couldn't be extinguished. But even they couldn't figure out the secret. And these were some of the most advanced chemists and engineers of their time. What's your best guess about Greek fire's secret ingredient? Do you think it was just really advanced chemistry for its time? Or could there have been something else that made it so special? Now let's talk about how Greek fire literally changed the course of world history. We're not exaggerating here. This stuff was so game-changing that entire civilizations survived or fell based on who had access to it. The first major test came during the Arab siege of Constantinople from 674 to 678. This wasn't just any siege. This was a make-or-break moment for Christianity in Europe. If Constantinople fell, the Arab armies would have had a clear path into the heart of Europe, and the whole continent might have become part of the Islamic world centuries earlier than anyone expected. The Arabs came prepared for everything except Greek fire. They had the largest fleet anyone had ever seen, experienced generals who had conquered half the known world, and siege engines that could break down any wall. But when those Byzantine ships started shooting liquid fire across the water, everything changed. Picture the scene. Hundreds of Arab ships packed into the Golden Horn, soldiers ready to storm the city walls. Then suddenly, these Byzantine vessels appear like ghosts in the morning mist. Bronze tubes glint in the sunlight, and then streams of green fire arc through the air. Within hours, the mighty Arab fleet was scattered burning wreckage floating on water that seemed to be on fire itself. The Arabs didn't just lose that battle. They lost their nerve. For 4 years, they had been the unstoppable force conquering everything in their path. Greek fire showed them they weren't invincible after all. The siege collapsed, and the Arab expansion into Europe was stopped cold. But that was just the beginning. Greek fire became the Byzantine Empire's ace in the hole for the next 800 years. Every time their enemies thought they had figured out how to beat the Byzantines, out came the liquid fire to save the day. In 717, the Arabs tried again with an even bigger fleet. They brought 1,800 ships and over 80,000 men, basically throwing everything they had at Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Leo III had maybe 400 ships. On paper it should have been a massacre. But paper doesn't burn like Greek fire does. The Byzantines waited until the Arab fleet was packed tight in the harbor, then unleashed hell. Imagine dominoes falling, except each domino is a ship full of soldiers, and instead of just tipping over, they explode into flames. Ship after ship caught fire, and the flames spread so fast that crews couldn't abandon ship quickly enough. The psychological warfare was just as devastating as the physical destruction. Arab sailors started refusing to serve on ships that might face Greek fire. Experienced captains, who had fought fearlessly against conventional weapons, would literally flee at the first sight of those bronze siphon tubes. This created a weird situation where the Byzantine Empire, which was actually getting weaker and smaller over time, could still punch way above its weight class. They were like a lightweight boxer who had somehow figured out how to throw punches that hit with heavyweight force. The Bulgars learned this lesson the hard way in 814. They had built a massive fleet to attack Constantinople by sea, thinking they could avoid the land-based defenses. The Bulgarian king Krum was so confident that he reportedly said his ships would drink the waters of the Bosphorus dry. Instead, those waters turned into a sea of fire. The Bulgarian fleet was completely destroyed, and Krum never attempted another naval attack. But Greek fire wasn't just about big naval battles. The Byzantines also used it for smaller, more targeted strikes that were almost like ancient special operations. They would send small, fast ships on nighttime raids, hitting enemy harbors with surgical precision. These raiders would sneak in under cover of darkness, set everything on fire with Greek fire, and disappear before anyone could organize a counterattack. One of the most famous of these raids happened in 821 against the rebel fleet of Thomas the Slav. Thomas had gathered a huge navy and was threatening to overthrow the Byzantine emperor. But a small squadron of Greek fire ships managed to sneak into his harbor at night and destroy nearly his entire fleet while most of the crews were sleeping on shore. The Byzantines also got creative with defensive uses of Greek fire. They would create fire ships, old vessels loaded with Greek fire mixture and sent drifting into enemy formations. These floating bombs were incredibly effective because enemy sailors couldn't just ignore them. Try to sink a fire ship, and you might accidentally set off the Greek fire and spread flames to your own vessels. By the 10th century, Greek fire had become so legendary that just the threat of it was enough to win battles. Enemy commanders would avoid naval engagements entirely if they knew the Byzantines had Greek fire ships in the area. It was like having a nuclear deterrent 900 years before gunpowder was even invented in Europe. Which battle do you think shows the true power of Greek fire best? The massive sieges that saved an entire empire, or the smaller raids that showed just how versatile this weapon could be? Here's where our story takes a tragic turn. Well, tragic if you're into ancient military technology. The most closely guarded secret of the medieval world was about to disappear forever, and nobody saw it coming. By the 12th century, the Byzantine Empire was in serious trouble. They were getting squeezed from all sides: Turks from the east, Normans from the west, and various Slavic groups from the north. The empire that had once controlled the entire eastern Mediterranean was shrinking fast. But they still had Greek fire, right? Their ultimate weapon that had saved them so many times before? Well, here's where things get complicated. The Byzantines had done such a good job keeping Greek fire secret that they had accidentally created a huge problem for themselves. Remember how only a few families knew the complete recipe? And how the knowledge was passed down from father to son in total secrecy. That system worked great when the empire was stable and those families were safe. But when your empire is collapsing and people are dying in wars, that super-secret knowledge starts disappearing with them. It's like if the recipe for Coca-Cola was only known by 3 people, and 2 of them died in a car crash. Except instead of losing a soft drink formula, the Byzantines were losing their most important military advantage. The first sign of trouble came in the 1100s, when Greek fire started appearing less frequently in battles. Some historians think this was because the supply of key ingredients was getting cut off as the Byzantines lost territory. Others believe the families who knew the secret were literally dying out. There's this heartbreaking account from around 1200 where a Byzantine general is desperately trying to find someone who knows how to make Greek fire properly. He's offering huge rewards, threatening terrible punishments, basically doing everything he can think of. But the knowledge is already gone. The people who knew the secret had died, and they had taken it with them to their graves. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was developing new military technologies that started making Greek fire less of a game changer. Crossbows were getting more powerful and accurate. Siege engines were becoming more sophisticated. And most importantly, other cultures were starting to develop their own incendiary weapons. The Arabs had figured out how to make something called naft, not quite as effective as Greek fire, but close enough to level the playing field. The Chinese were experimenting with early forms of gunpowder. Even the Europeans were starting to use primitive cannons. But the real death blow came from an unexpected direction: the Crusades. Now, you might think the Crusades would have helped the Byzantines, since the Crusaders were supposedly coming to help Christian Constantinople against the Muslim armies. But it didn't work out that way at all. The Crusaders were basically medieval gangsters with religious motivation. They were more interested in getting rich and grabbing land than in actually helping the Byzantine Empire. And in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, they did something unthinkable. They attacked and conquered Constantinople itself. Picture the scene: the greatest city in the Christian world, burning and being looted by other Christians. The Crusaders destroyed libraries, melted down priceless artifacts for their gold, and scattered the people who had kept Byzantine knowledge alive for centuries. This was the final nail in the coffin for Greek fire. Whatever families had still preserved the secret were either killed, fled the city, or scattered to the winds. The workshops where Greek fire was made were destroyed. The equipment was melted down for scrap metal. 800 years of carefully guarded knowledge vanished in a few days of mindless destruction. When the Byzantines managed to retake Constantinople in 1261, they tried desperately to recreate Greek fire. They brought in chemists from all over the known world. They experimented with every combination of ingredients they could think of. They even tried torturing captured enemies who might have learned something about incendiary weapons. Nothing worked. Oh, they could make things that burned, and they could make fires that were hard to put out. But they couldn't recreate the specific properties that had made Greek fire so terrifying: the ability to burn on water, the way it stuck to everything, the distinctive green flames that had struck fear into enemies for 8 centuries. The last recorded use of something called Greek fire was in 1453, during the final siege of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. But historians think this was probably just regular incendiary materials that the Byzantines were desperately calling Greek fire, in hopes of scaring their enemies. It didn't work. Constantinople fell, the Byzantine Empire ended after more than 1,000 years, and with it died the last hope of ever rediscovering the secret of true Greek fire. Today we can put people on the moon, split atoms, and create materials that didn't exist in nature. But we still can't figure out exactly how a medieval chemist named Kallinikos managed to make fire that burned on water. The secret that once saved European civilization is lost forever, and it's going to stay that way. What do you think is the most tragic part of this story? The fact that such an important secret was lost, or the way it was lost through violence and chaos rather than being forgotten naturally over time? So there you have it, the incredible, mysterious, and ultimately tragic story of Greek fire. For over 800 years, this impossible weapon helped keep the Byzantine Empire alive and changed the course of world history. It was the ancient world's closest thing to a superweapon, and yet we have absolutely no idea how it actually worked. Think about how crazy that is. We live in an age where you can look up almost any information instantly, where scientific knowledge is shared globally, where we figured out incredibly complex technologies. But this one secret from the medieval world remains completely beyond our reach. Greek fire reminds us that human knowledge is more fragile than we like to think. All it takes is one generation failing to pass something down, one library burning, one family dying out, and centuries of accumulated wisdom can vanish forever. But maybe that's part of what makes Greek fire so fascinating. In our age of smartphones and satellites, there's something almost magical about a technology that remains genuinely mysterious. It's like having a real-life ancient artifact that refuses to give up its secrets no matter how hard we study it. The story of Greek fire also shows us how a single innovation can change everything. One Syrian chemist with one crazy idea ended up altering the balance of power for nearly a millennium. It makes you wonder what modern innovations might seem just as impossible and game-changing to people looking back at us from 1,000 years in the future. If you found this deep dive into ancient military mysteries as fascinating as we did, Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got tons more incredible historical mysteries coming up, from the lost technology of Roman concrete that we still can't perfectly replicate, to the mysterious Greek computer that predicted eclipses 2,000 years before we thought such devices were possible. Drop a comment below and let us know what historical mystery you'd like us to investigate next. Are you more interested in lost technologies like Greek fire, mysterious ancient structures, or maybe famous historical figures whose true stories are completely different from what we learned in school? And if you really enjoyed this video, check out our playlist on ancient technologies that blow our minds. Trust us, Greek fire is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to incredible innovations that our ancestors came up with using nothing but their creativity and determination. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is way more incredible than most people realize. We'll see you in the next video.